Welcome to the AFL Editorial Board podcast. My name is Peter Clarke. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Atheists for Liberty Editorial Board, and I'm joined today by James Cowell, who is the national campus organizer for AFL. The first topic that I want to jump into is actually an article that I wrote for Merriam-West. I wrote this essay about a week ago called "The Freedom to be Religious as an Atheist." And it sparked some kind of interesting conversations with both some atheists and some Christians online. And I've had a lot of fun talking about this the last week or so. And I sent you the article, so I know that you maybe have some thoughts, but maybe I'll start by giving the quick pitch.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the article starts out talking about how there's this movie, Coffee and Cigarettes, that is a phenomenal film. And in this film, Tom Waits says to Iggy Pop, the beauty about quitting smoking is that now that I quit, I can have one. So it's a little bit of a paradox there, but there's like logic to it too, because when you do quit smoking, you're a non-smoker. That's the idea. Mm-hmm. And a non-smoker doesn't become a smoker just by having one cigarette. If you have one cigarette, you're just a guy who had a cigarette. You're not a smoker.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So there is kind of like a logic there, but it actually applies in a fascinating way to the discussion of atheism, because, and I think this actually is true, that when you become an atheist and you have no God belief, you can kind of dabble in religion without becoming religious. Because, to take a really boring example, like a lot of college classes will teach the Bible as literature. And it's true, like it's a kind of grand and very epic element of human literature that's,
True.
so, yeah. It's changed the world more than almost any other book. And when you're an atheist, it is just literature, right? Like it's kind of sort of some messy history plus literature, right? Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, we can get more into the details there, but what do you think about that basic premise that once you're an atheist, you can dabble in religion? You're free to be religious in a sense.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with that, because it speaks to my, I hate this term, but it speaks to my lived experience. Because, I remember after this tremendous battle of faith in my own head where I was like, oh, I don't know, when I was freaking out. Once you get past that part and you accept that, okay, yeah, this is what I believe, I'm not an atheist, I started to take a look at literally every religion, because not only for my own personal arguments, because I started to see how similar in a lot of ways most of these religions are, and you can sort of see the fundamental building blocks, but also everything became a history lecture. Everything became I guess like a Hogwarts class in a lot of ways. It was like, wow, I can like learn about what you believe the universe does, even though I totally know it doesn't, but it was still interesting. And it was so cool to really objectively take a look at things like Satanism, for example, who for a while, even as a Catholic, I had given them more credit than a lot of my friends wanted them to, because I kind of realized a lot of these people are just kind of, maybe they believe in something that's more supernatural, but a lot of them are just kind of like edgy free thinker types. They're not really religious intrinsically sometimes. Some of them are, some of them aren't.
So let me ask you, because I'm kind of curious. This is something I did not get into in my essay. How far do you think it's legit to take it? Like, if you're a person who's an atheist, but you like pray 5 times a day,
see, that's
you listen
to
Christian music nonstop. Like, are you like actually maybe just embarrassed to call yourself a Christian, but you totally are, or something?
Yeah,
like, where's the line here?
I feel like that might be an atheist who ran a little bit too much into Pascal's wager. Maybe that might be what happened with that one. But I would say there is a line. Like I used to meditate a lot, and I would particularly do meditations on like my nationalism and my ancestors, because like having family and having ancestors and knowing that they got you to this point, to me, is the closest thing you could ever get to some sort of like really transcendent experience, to know that like people came before you and like all of their journeys are in your DNA in some way, shape, and form. That's awesome, right? But even while I would meditate on that and it would bring me some sort of serenity, which is another proof against religion, sort of, I never like took it to the point of praying to it. It was more like, yeah, this is just a mental headspace I'm getting in. It's clearing my mind, and like that's fine. However, if I was like to make a little shrine to my ancestors in the corner of my room, and I was like, yeah, I'm James the atheist. Also, here's my shrine. Then you kind of raise a little bit more than a skeptical eyebrow, I would assume. So,
I mean, it's funny for me to think about how, a lot of atheists, myself included, let's say we dabble to some degree or another in religion, even to the extent of there's this book, Principia Discordia.
yes.
And it's not a religious book, but it is like a very goofy, it's hard to describe actually, but effectively it's about the goddess Eris, the goddess of chaos, like the Greek goddess. And it's kind of like a book about her. And you do almost like get into like this headspace of worshiping the goddess Eris if you take it seriously. And you do that completely with like a healthy dose of irony and like some comedy. But, it only even makes sense and resonates at all because it, like, if you have it someplace in your mind, the idea that people worship God, right?
Yes.
Like that, doing that at all only makes sense in a world where some people worship God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, makes sense. It's how would I put this eloquently? You can still get into those headspaces without believing it. I mean, we kind of touched on that in our first episodes together. It's very possible to, like, if you're going to church and you understand that everybody around you is so positive and so peaceful, and they're genuinely exalting this God that they believe in, it's possible to, like, by proxy feel that positivity, even if in my head I'm like, wow, what the hell's going on? So it's possible. I don't think anybody can really fight against that. If you do fight against it, I have several questions, but
Well, it's funny for me to think about that. There are all these atheists doing some sort of God belief. On the other hand, there are, I'm sure, and I kind of know for a fact, there are a lot of Christians who really are atheist and they dabble so much in atheism that effectively they are atheist. And this is like the funny thing about when you do go to church, as I did as a child, all the time. Like basically every Sunday, the pastor will say, as you go out into the world, make sure you don't become worldly, or that something to that effect. And everyone just kind of like knows, even though you don't say it, like the second I leave this place, this church, the second I leave here, I'm living in a completely different reality because we don't live in the Middle Ages where God is a part of everything, including like explaining the weather. God's kind of a part of nothing in your day-to-day life unless you like really like force it in, as they try to get you to do on Sunday. So like kind of every Christian day to day, minute by minute is totally an atheist. And even when they're praying, they probably in the back of their mind are kind of like, yeah, no one's really listening, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of it, I feel like I had a really genuine, firm belief in God, and I want to touch on something that you said in your article, by the way, because you were discussing the fact that, like, the belief in God was kind of like believing in it was a friend, it was a father, a mentor, like a sort of guiding light. And I remember there were 2 or 3 occasions on which this started to go away. But before I get into that, I do want to touch on what you just said about Christians acting and behaving as atheists. This is what I was trying to say when I was talking about the fact that I don't believe religious belief actually does much for most people. I should have been more clear about that in the last video. Of course, for someone that's going through a hard time, the ability to shift either responsibility or stress onto a different topic, like believing in God, is going to be helpful. Okay, that's fine, and I totally understand that, even if in my own brain I'm thinking, okay, you're just shifting responsibility, or you're just shifting the way you see it, and that's why you feel better. It's not because God's there. I would say that so many Christians that I know personally that claim to be good Christians, they're great people, but the ones that even, like, at my campus, who will hold up signs saying, repent, or come talk to us about Jesus, are the types of people that I know who will, like, decry materialism, and they'll say materialism bad, but they're the same people I know that, like, love name brand products all the time, and they're the same people who will go out to bars all the time, and that's fine. But I think that when people don't realize there's so many contradictions in the way that, like, the principles of how your religion makes you live versus how you actually live, you are believing this or you're performing this because it's a social expectation, not because you really truly believe it. Like someone who's really devoutly Christian. I'm not saying you can't have technology, but they wouldn't care if they have name brand products. They wouldn't matter to them, right? That's not important at all. Their ability to live and have a job, that's one thing. But like, oh, I need to collect like the latest TV because that's what I need because it's for God or something like that. That mindset wouldn't exist.
Yeah, there's like a walk the walk, don't just talk the talk phenomenon
exactly.
that they used to always say in church. And it's kind of true because like if you do walk the walk of something you believe, it definitely shows like everyone believes in gravity. Full stop, no one doubts that. Because we all like no one's jumping out of a window because you believe actually wholeheartedly that gravity is going to kill you, if you're high enough up. And by that analogy, there's just a ton of Christians who are stepping out of windows all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I can hear the comment section now. So actually, I'm going to say this before we move on. I'm not expecting them to be perfect. Okay, that's not at all what I'm expecting of them, because Christianity in and of itself, especially with like Catholicism, from my experience, is very knowledgeable about the fact that people are imperfect creatures. There's my favorite saying of all time, comes from a provocateur, Milo Yiannopoulos, I don't like now, but I liked back then, who said, you become a Protestant because you think you're a good person, you're a Catholic because you know you're not. And so for me, when I was Catholic, that was like, oh, ding, 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 because like, yeah, we're not perfect, it's okay, you can screw up. So like, I'm not expecting anybody to be perfect in this, but there comes a point in time where you're so not perfect at what you're doing that you're just bad at it, or you're just not it. Right. Mm-hmm. I could say that I'm a mason, right? And technically, if I'm building something, I guess I would be, right? If I'm laying bricks down. However, if every brick that I make is so bad that everything crumbles underneath, crumbles off of it, or if I don't know how to fundamentally make a brick in and of itself, maybe I'm either a bad mason or just not really a mason. I'm just saying I am.
Yeah, there's a lot there in the sense that, I mean, I don't think that the Bible actually prepares you to be a good person at all, let alone like a flawless person, just because the guidebook just doesn't work in modern times. And, Christians always come to atheists and are like, well, you have no morality. Why don't you just do anything that you want? But like the morality, this is a big topic and we don't have to get into it at all. But like society itself is a thing that humans created, just like religion is a thing that humans created. Just because you know that doesn't make it illegitimate. And with the second you know that, like, you get to play around with the facts about like what works. How should I live my life so that the system itself works, because I will flourish in a working system. Very, very basic stuff. Like I want to be able to make it so that the United States of America, which gives me roads and gives me clean water and gives me clean air, I want to like perpetuate this thing. And by doing that, I'm going to pay my taxes to this thing. And like, so I'm being like a good citizen and a good person by participating, because I get back what I put in, and I thrive and I'm good to my neighbors because they're good back to me. And that's what makes a good community. I do all of these things without thinking about like morality and is God watching me? It's like, no, like on a practical level, my life is better because I'm a quote unquote good person. Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that's really true. I'll let you go on to the next subject. We could go in circles about so many examples for this. So I'll let you go.
I know we totally could, right? I just have one more point I want to make about the Merriam-West article, which is that I did actually get into an argument with somebody on Substack about this article who was an atheist, and they were quite offended that I would be so easy on religion and be so kind of wishy-washy about, oh, I'm an atheist now, so now I can dabble in religion. They found that wishy-washiness or non-hardcoreness about being an atheist was really dangerous. And they raised points about how religion is so destructive and it's so opposed to basic reality and the fundamentals of reality. There's kind of some truth there. I argued with this person. I'm not even sure who it was, but I in my mind shot them down, But it's not like there's nothing there, because I do think that religion is harmful in a lot of respects.
Also, there's nothing there.
Yeah. I kind of want to hear your thoughts.
Barring Islam, objectively, right? Every other religion has lost its fangs and lost its ability to actually harm any of us. So my ability to culturally appreciate or appropriate or understand any of these religions means nothing because they can do nothing to me at this point.
I mean, Christian nationalism would love to rear its head
It
and
would love
to
to.
take away a lot of our rights.
And it's getting there. It's getting there. But I mean, it's still not like we can still openly mock Christian nationalists and not fear.
We're encouraged to by the broader society. We're encouraged to, yeah.
And we're not under threat of violence, right? So I can at both times believe all of these things and say that like Christianity as a whole is mutated into this like, hey, just don't be mean, philosophy. And Judaism in and of itself is now just a channel for atheism, it seems. And most of the other religions are either so small or so obscure to most people that nobody cares, that it doesn't really matter. And there's only really one that still seems to really genuinely try to enforce its dominance on the world. So I can believe all of those things and say and affirm and also say that if this was to change, I would gladly fight, just like that one gentleman would or woman would. I would gladly fight alongside him and say that everything he's saying is correct. But right now, you can take the piss out of something when it's not that dangerous to you. While understanding it's bad. It's kind of like going to a zoo and viewing a snake, right? It's a snake, and it's a snake, but it's behind the glass right now. And so until it's out of the glass, you're okay. It doesn't mean I lose sight of how dangerous something could be. It just means you have to be watchful and mindful.
Yeah, no, I that is what I basically argued, and I do agree with that. Pivoting to another topic, we recently published a video and also a quick essay by Ronald Lindsay. Mm-hmm. And he's a member of the AFL board of directors and a great guy. He's a philosopher and a lawyer. And I really enjoyed my conversation that I had with him. Part of that conversation, and this is what became the essay on the AFL website, is I asked Ron about whether or not wokeism or like leftist ideology, whether or not it is now a religion. And he had some interesting thoughts. I mean, he basically said that he doesn't want to, for constitutional law purposes, say that it is like a religion for sure, 100% by definition. But he did say that there are a lot of parallels. And this is, I think, what people talk about, like Peter Boghossian and a lot of folks in this atheism world. They will talk about all the analogies between wokeism and religion. Mm-hmm. I want to get your thoughts. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on this. Like, frankly, I feel like I could argue it both ways. So maybe whatever position you take, maybe I'll see if I can argue against it.
So I'm not going to make the definitive claim whether it's a religion or not, but I would prefer to look at how it carries itself and what it does. I think that more or less, if you act like a certain thing enough, you become that thing, even if you're not principally that thing, if that makes sense. So before we go into wokeism, I'll make a really strong comparison to like people who are communists. Communism may purport itself to be atheism largely. It might try to take that label for itself. However, strict adherence to a norm set about by a higher echelon group of people who apparently have claims to knowledge and claims to the structures of society that you can't access as the proletariat, but they can because they're party leaders. All of those things are not atheistic principles. In atheism, there is no rule that says you and I can't have the same revelation, quote unquote, that like the president has, right? And so our ability to talk would be equal and neutral, would be on the same ground as that. And if we disagreed, we wouldn't throw each other into camps for it. So for me, even if communism has no religion, the strict adherence and the process by which it maintains itself is religious, which more or less amounts to the same thing. You ban discussion, you do away with anything that anything that takes you away from the main point of communism. You don't allow it. You say that you have to better the society for the leader and for the system, and that's it. That's all that matters in your life. That's religious. That's not secular. So if you look at wokeism, I think we're seeing a lot of the same things going on, even if they are secular in nature. you can have a religious mindset and a religious process to how you do things, which more or less amounts to the same thing in my view.
So if you Google what is the definition of religion, which I just did, what comes up is the belief in and worship of a superhuman power or powers, especially a god or gods. That's the first definition that comes up. I know that there are other definitions here, but this is what's kind of interesting in that when you say religion to me, or I think to kind of anybody, you think about the big five, right? And you think about what they all have in common, and there's a central God figure, and then there's belief all the way down. So we're kind of talking about, if wokeism is a religion, we're kind of talking about the all the way down stuff. It's there's no central God figure, but all the stuff that carries off of it, like dogma and a belief in a system that you can't question. If you do question it, you're ostracized from a community. There's like blasphemy associated with wokeism. There's often people will say that there's original sin, in that like whiteness, people will say, is the original sin. So I mean, there are definitely a lot of parallels, but it's missing that, at least by this one definition, it's missing that core element, which is a belief in a superhuman power or powers, especially a god. Like that's just kind of like missing. So if you do take that to be the definition, which I know people quibble with it, but if you do take that to be the definition, then wokeism can't be a religion on the same par as the others.
I don't know. I would say, see, I think their God figure, and this, oh God, I'm gonna sound like a Jordan Peterson, but their God figure, their metaphysical claim is centered around one person, even though they claim to be so open and collective, and it's themselves. It's all about me, fundamentally, even if you claim it's about the broader,
or it's your group, because the wokeists, they're tribal. It's a very tribal, identitarian thing where like it's not just me, but it's my group, all white guys, it's my group. Well, apparently,
as George Orwell tried to say multiple times and wrote multiple books and essays about, language must be cousins with logic. It must have some relationship to truth and to logic. So when I'm listening to how somebody who I would consider woke, which I would really just call hyper progressive, like progressivism at any cost kind of person, I pay attention to the language that they use. And while they claim to talk for other groups, number one, a person who claims to talk for other groups while not being in them already thinks highly of themselves in and of, by nature. They have to. Number two, every statement they make, no matter on what side, no matter on what dichotomy they're in, whether it's black versus white or poor versus rich, it's always, well, through my lived experience and in my experience, and I won't speak to your experience, but in my experience, while there is apparently this collective, we're all talking about groups here, my opinion still needs to be heard, even though I'm going to say that it's not how it is. But the way that I'm speaking, just plainly and openly, means I'm elevating myself over everybody else. If you interact with these people on college campuses, it's like one of the things you notice right away is like, even if you come up with a point and you're being very, very sympathetic and very empathetic to them, and you're trying to be, really peaceful with them, there's always some sort of like domination factor of like, no, you're wrong, and I think you're wrong because this is my experience. And that sort of mindset is what puts you in the realm of like, oh, you really have such a high opinion of yourself that you might as well permit yourself to do anything.
Well, yeah. So what do you make of this idea that, I know that like Carl Jung has talked about this and other folks, if you remove God, you do have to fill it. Like there's a void there that gets filled. And when Carl Jung wrote about this, he was talking specifically about communism, like you mentioned earlier. Communism was used to fill that void. In modern day China, same thing. Like they're like massively atheistic in China, but like the party fills that for you. You effectively worship the party. It's the same thing. And so we almost, like wokeist folks, are kind of sort of like the Chinese populace, how they worship the party being the woke doctrine. And it is interesting, like you were saying, they all say the same words. There's a terminology that is kind of like top down, And you know very quickly if you're saying the wrong thing, because everyone in your group is going to tell you use the wrong word there.
Yeah,
or whatever.
I was called I was called a counter revolutionary by somebody who claimed to not be very very dogmatic in a class once, and I remember just kind of chuckling to myself because I was like, that's the kind of language you only use to like the Untermensch. You know, you wouldn't call a person that you just disagree with counter revolutionary. You know.
So I'm kind of realizing that if I were to really actually strongly argue against this view that wokeism is a religion, the only way I can kind of do it is to have a hard definition.
Yeah.
I think that that's true because as soon as you do have a very strict definition, then it is actually easier to say, no, it's not a religion. It's just kind of sort of like a religion. But I do want to come back to the point that Ron Lindsay raised, that he said something about like when for constitutional law purposes or whatever. That's actually a really good point because it matters in the legal system how we define terms. So for example, art. If a certain type of painting or a certain type of, work is considered art, it's taxed in a different way for like if it's shipped internationally. There's a different tax structure than if it's not art, for example. So kind of the same thing with religion. If you are religion, your church gets excluded from taxes. And an interesting example here is probably the Satanic Temple, where they are by law defined as a religion. Even though they are an atheist group, they still have, I guess, enough going on. I'd be curious kind of like how they get around having a god, but they call themselves a religion. I actually talked to Lucien Greaves not too long ago, and I should have asked him about that. It's an interesting topic. But, like it does matter. Like at some end of the day level, like somebody's not paying taxes or is paying taxes based on how we define religion, right? So, yeah, I mean, like if a group of hyper left ideologues had a brick and mortar place and they all came together to talk about their ideologies, would they be tax exempt?
See, so I'll kind of jump in, and this is where I was saying when I started this sort of little soiree into our discussion of wokeism being a religion. This is why I said that I wouldn't definitively say it is, but it operates like one, because in principle there is no grand claim that like they don't have a book yet that says like this is our entire top-down structure, this is our layout of all of our beliefs, and like I don't know, insert random, AOC is our goddess, some random person who could be thrown into the woke movement, right? And saying like this is our metaphysical leader, right? That doesn't exist. So because it doesn't exist, they cannot be a religion in the way that we think about them. But it doesn't mean that I still can't say, yeah, you're acting like a religious person when you're being woke.
Okay, I have one more thing for you to chew on here in this conversation. Curious your thoughts. So there's this framing that wokeism is a religion, right? There's another framing that, and this is like Bill Maher's famous for saying this, it's a woke mind virus. It's a mind virus. So and like interestingly, like mind virus, like it bites more. It's more of like it's a mind virus. It's infectious, right? Like a virus. What do you think is, one, the better term, religion versus mind virus, and two, what would be the more effective political label to slap on it if you wanted to defeat the religion/mind virus?
I'm about to say something that might. Oh, okay. Oh boy, yeah, get your popcorn ready. I don't think there's a difference.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I like.
All right.
Who was it? Was it Dennett or was it Dawkins that said that it might as well be a sickness because of the way it kind of plays out in your day-to-day lives? It doesn't mean that you are, a sick person. It doesn't mean you can't live your life and be fine. You can have dormant cancers after all. But it more or less is the same thing.
I'm gonna argue that. I think that I'm gonna argue against this. So I do think that evolutionarily speaking, there is to some degree something innate in us that enables us to have a God belief. Yep. And I think that we do personify things like the hawk god or whatever, the sun god. We personify things and that becomes religion. Our brains want to connect us to the broader universe. That makes us kind of religious. Whereas political ideology, I don't know if it's maybe it's using the same brain mechanics, but it feels different for a political ideology to like grip into you in that same way. It's more of like a soul. Well, so here's maybe the last point I'll make here is that like it's more of like a social thing that you're trying to like get score points in your social community, whereas religion, you're at your conceivably at the most profound when you have no community. You're on the mountaintop communing with God and your sun god, right?
Okay.
Or something like that. Whereas like I don't think that you can conceivably be the most tapped into wokeism if you're alone on a mountaintop reflecting on the profundity of wokeism. I think that you do have to have there's a community infectious element to it.
I think your argument would have worked in like 14, 15. I think your argument falls flat in 2024 because not a lot of people, barring like the incredibly orthodox types for religion, go out to mountaintops by themselves and pray.
But every Christian does like at night commune with God, and that is like supposedly, and I remember being there. That's the most at one you are with your religion, and you it actually means something at night before bed when you sleep. Whereas I don't think wokeism. I don't think woke people go to bed at night. They're like, oh, praise my woke beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I'm gonna push back on that because I would.
Oh, they do. They pray at night to the woke gods.
No, not that. I'm gonna push back on the community aspect here. As somebody who was raised Catholic but had a split parentage, so I got a stepdad who was Methodist and my mom became Protestant. My dad continued to be Catholic. Especially in Protestant services in like the contemporary era. The fact that people would like raise their hands up to God in communion with Him in church, and it was a very like religious, 2000% like almost cult like it felt like to just see everybody raise their hands to the ceiling and chant the same things. I'm sure Gregorian chants probably sound the same thing to Protestants, but I would argue that is the same thing that happens in progressive circles when they get together and they talk about how performative. I mean, they don't think it's performative, but they talk about how good what they've been doing is. And when they wake up and when they go about their day-to-day lives, even if it's like 9 o'clock in the morning, I know people who I've interacted with who like right off the bat have been like, what am I going to do for Palestine today? Or what am I going to do for, what am I going to do to fight the patriarchy today? I've heard those terms in the real world. So dual aspect to religion where you can be private with it, right? Like I loved sitting by myself and, going through this 45-minute long prayer process. And that was really cool to me. But like most Catholics don't do that. And most Protestants don't necessarily spend hours on meditation or daily prayer. They might say a 5-minute prayer at like before bed. But does that mean it's not largely a communitarian, led project? No, I don't think so.
So yeah, that definitely is a thing. I do know that when someone loses their religion, and we've both been there, and there's like documentation on this, it is like losing a drug.
Yes.
Or giving over a drug. Yes. There actually is a phenomenon where you do feel like you've lost a friend, and it's real. Like it's neurological.
It hurts.
I don't know if that happens with losing wokeism. From what I hear, like Anna Kasparian has very recently kind of come out like against like some of her earlier wokeisms, and she seems like freed and like stoked, and like I don't hear much from her about being like, oh my God, I'm so sad that I listened to Blocked and Reported and now I know the truth about.
I want to go into that because I was really touched when you were writing about that. I remember for me in a very, very short, I'll take a short little segue into what it was like for me. I remember I was cutting the grass. It was during COVID. I was cutting the grass and I was like, I hadn't heard God's Not Great. It's apparently the best book for atheists. Let me like buy the audiobook or download it off YouTube and I'll like cut the grass and listen to it. I remember cutting the grass and like thinking up all the counter objections and everything, and then swiftly just realizing like, oh, that's not hitting the mark. Oh no! And I had to sit, and I remember there was that like for 2 days, and I'm doing all this yard work and cleaning up stuff. I'm like, oh wow, is everything that I've believed, even if I didn't believe it too dogmatically, is everything I believed just utter BS? Have I been like, and so I remember feeling really saddened because I was like, and I think this is very particular for Catholics. Catholics have venial sins and mortal sins. So like venial sins are like, I cussed out somebody at the store today because I was mad and I didn't really think about it, but I was just angry. And then a mortal sin would be like, I hate Peter, so because I hate Peter, I popped his tires today, and I willfully made the choice to like screw him over. And so a mortal sin to a Catholic mindset cuts you off from God's grace. You've done something that's so direct and so bad and so straightforward that you knew was bad, but you chose to do it anyway, of sound mind. That I remember it felt very much like that, where I was like, ooh, that's a pain. I felt like an internal pain of like, oh, I've done something bad or something bad is happening. And so for me, it was this like several month process of like, maybe I'm more of like a deistic Catholic. Maybe I don't have all the answers, but like something had to create everything. And then slowly through like September, I'm walking on the strip near my school. I'm smoking a cigarette and I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, I'm scared that I don't know. That's weird. Like I never claimed to know, but now I'm like, it's just weird not having anywhere to turn to. I can't go to a priest because like every argument now that I've been filled up with Hitchens arguments, right? Every argument he's making, it doesn't hit because now I'm like, oh, but what about this? Oh, well, you don't have an answer for that. So I remember being super, super confused and sad, and I felt like maybe this is a freeing thing, but I was just so nervous about it, and it felt like when you disappoint your parents. It's kind of what it felt like to me. So I could speak to that 2,000%, but I don't know. I think it's individualistic for some people because like over time, my disappointment grew to be happiness. Like in a very short amount of time, it went from like, oh no, to like what's going on, to like I don't know, to oh, this feels like really nice. Like I'm subject to no metaphysical laws. I can make my own choices and my own destiny, and there's no little snake guy trying to convince me that I should do evil things. It's a little daunting because you take personal responsibility for everything, right? But it's more like, oh, that's my choice. There's no factors at play here. I don't know. I mean, I've met. Actually, this is ironic because I had this conversation with a friend of mine very recently who used to be like a dyed-in-the-wool authoritarian communist who's now like a conservative, atheistic guy. But and we went to college together. Great guy. But like, had you told me immediately, like upon meeting him back when I was a classical liberal and he was a communist, and we kind of switched sides-ish, because I became a leftist and he became a conservative. If you had told me that this man would have gone through that transition, I would have been really surprised. But also when he was talking to me about how there was a moment where he was like, oh, this is all wrong. And I think he said it was when he went to his grad program and there was a man with a full-on beard and like veiny arms and everything who went through this program who wanted to be called like she, her. And he was like, you're not even trying. You're literally just you're just a dude in a dress. But like seeing how everybody in the room was just like, yes, yes, queen. Like, yes, she, her. And he was like, huh? Like this, because in college, right, you don't really see that. But then when you start, over time, you start seeing more and more and more examples potentially of like, oh, this is just against the norm. That's a little weird. And he described it as like a very watershed moment for him. So I think it's very individual. Maybe like Anna Kasparian didn't have that, but I know plenty of people who have had that. So maybe we're in the middle. Maybe we're at an impasse. I don't know.
So are you down to call both religion and wokeism mind viruses for political purposes? Like, do you think that it is a smart political move to pull a Bill Maher and to call them mind viruses? You do? Okay.
I would say that. I would say, there's something that plays into how our brains work that we can't necessarily fight against. It's very difficult to fight against initially, and it's very appealing. I think even like the tenets of wokeism, right? If you were to take away the social consequences, and you were just to have like wokeism on paper still doesn't sound good to me because I know all the philosophical arguments. But if you were to take like Adam in a vacuum and who knows nothing and present him with like everyone's going to be cared for and like people who are going to be like they're going to be accurately proportionally represented, and people who've been backstabbed are going to get like they're going to get preferential treatment for this and this, versus like actually no, you're going to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and like you have to make every decision and life isn't fair. If you take these two things, I think most people in a vacuum with no knowledge of anything would be like, one sounds more positive. I might go with the positive one.
I'm gonna take the high ground here.
Go ahead.
And
you say no.
I'm gonna call neither mind viruses. I think just because both actually have some good parts, and viruses are all bad. So both wokeism, I subscribe to some wokeisms, I'm sure, to some degree or another. Like I'm on the left, and I think that they, like people on the far left believe some legit things that people on the right call wokeism that I don't think would be classified as. So I'd argue that. And also in religion, as we started this conversation, it's got some good stuff in there. It's not all bad. Like the golden rule is kind of universally true, and the fact that Jesus with his influence said it probably made the world a better place. So that's like the golden rule isn't a mind virus. So I'm keeping that. So I think that I will reserve mind virus for just like maybe hate that spreads among people.
You're giving Jesus too much credit with that one, but I'll accept it.
No, I'm with you. I'm totally with you.
because he wasn't the first one to say that, but it's
no,
fair.
he wasn't. No, but that actually makes it more credible in the sense that it is a universal observation about how to make societies function properly. Like, and he keyed into that, which is great. Like, good job, Jesus. So yeah, but I think that there is like an underlying tribalness and hateness about both wokeism and religion, that it others people and it makes people like it excludes rather than like welcoming and seeing us all as humans equally valuable and stuff like that. That's the thing that I think is a virus, but I think that it's just a part of it. I don't think that
I want to throw something. I want to throw a little tidbit out there, and we'll see. I want to see your response to this, and I'll try to make it as quick as possible. So there is a theory about cancer that says that cancer could be in some way, shape, or form, to my understanding, an evolutionary process for us. Like the reason why cancer rates are going up isn't just because of radiation, but also you got to think about what cancer does. Cancer fundamentally takes a group of cells and it just overproduces those cells to the point that they become a tumor that the body cannot, coexist with, right? And I remember in my freshman year bio class, one of the theories that was thrown out by this teacher was that a study had said the reason why cancer rates are going up is because in some way, shape, or form, at some point in time, the mass production or overproduction of cells could be a positive thing for us going forward. Imagine you have severe damage to your body, and then we use the cancer functionality to reproduce and to infect, quote unquote, the rest of the body. It could be used and channeled to fight something rather than destroy something.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you here. And
so I think you know where I'm taking this. So
even a virus, I kind of misspoke in that I said viruses are all bad. Even viruses aren't all bad. Like you can inject things into your body using a virus-like mechanism that has healing properties to it. I think that, like the mRNA vaccine is kind of like sort of like this. Yeah. And I mean, we use viruses to do CRISPR too, right? Isn't CRISPR like using effectively a virus? So
I think it is, or something similar to it. I'm not 100% sure on the science, but
yeah, me neither. But it's all very complicated. It's all very complicated.
I'll take your point.
Analogies all break down at some level, I guess. Yes. Okay.
I wanted to raise it to you, so we'll see.
Hey, very good. Well, running out of time here, but that was a great conversation, and yeah, we'll be back. We'll be back soon with more high level discourse on the.
Definitely. Thank you, Peter. Yeah.
Atheism. All right.